Hey guys, it's Dark here with another video. In this video we're going to explore how endgame gearing works in Final Fantasy XIV versus World of Warcraft, and I will tell you WoW players that you'd be amazed at how they do it, and I think Final Fantasy players will understand why some WoW players are coming to Final Fantasy. Again, another thank you for all the support that you have been giving to all the videos. If you do enjoy the content, if you do subscribe, it does help a lot, so thanks. So with that being said, let's go into gearing in World of Warcraft and explore the problems that are present in it. I'm not talking about alts, I'm talking about, when you first hit level 80 on any of your characters. What happens is all the dungeons do open for you. So you'll get a list of dungeons that you can go to, and usually your item level is somewhere around 150-ish, I would say. And then what happens is, what you can do is you can queue up for normal dungeons. So you have something like the duty finder in Final Fantasy XIV. You queue up for a random dungeon and you get into a group, and you need to get to level 155, eye level 155, to be able to queue up for heroics, which are the same dungeons but with higher difficulty. It also opens up some newer dungeons as well. One of the issues is that when you actually queue up for randoms to get to that 155 eye level, every dungeon that you queue up for has a bunch of loot that they can drop. So let me show you guys. So for example, let's look at the other side dungeon. And look at all the loot that it has. So it has all these different pieces of loot that can drop, and they just drop at random. So you can do a run. Sometimes you don't get anything. You can do a run and you get a piece that you don't actually need, and it's not an upgrade for you. And this just keeps happening until you get lucky with loot and you get some the pieces that you need, and your item level goes to 155. At that point, what you do is you queue up for heroics, and heroics is the same thing. You go into dungeons, and pieces of loot drop, and again, it's completely random what you get. Of course, you get gear specific to your specialization, so in that sense it's good, but what pieces actually drop are completely random, and sometimes it's frustrating for people to go over and over again and get loot but not the pieces that you want. And it seems like a time waste. Like, you go spend 20 minutes, half an hour in an instance, and you get a piece that you don't need and you don't want to use. But this isn't the major part. It is a big deal. I mean, a lot of WoW players gave a lot of feedback on this random way of assigning loot, but let's move past that. Once you get geared out in heroic, you have 171 eye level. At that point, there are two ways to get higher item level gear. So there's something called mythic keystones in World of Warcraft, and what it entails is, and I don't want to get into too much detail, but basically you have the same dungeons that you do in heroic. Now you do them on mythic difficulty, okay? And that's just one higher level difficulty. It sometimes involves a bit like an extra mechanic on the boss, and it's just they hit harder and stuff like that. And the way you get into those is you can't use the dungeon finder anymore. So there's no something where you can queue or anything. So what you need to do in order to get into those groups is you need to actually manually find groups. And in order to achieve that, Blizzard has made this pre-made groups, and you can go into dungeons and you can say find a group. And at that point you'll see all these different people that are looking for groups. Obviously you see a lot of carries being sold when you're looking into these. It's actually like 31% off, but anyway, that's besides the point. So you come here and you try to search for mythic dungeons, and those dungeons drop 181 or 184, I believe. So getting into zeros, obviously if you have 171 eye level, sometimes people don't even invite you. They try to get people with higher item levels in first. But usually with mythic zeros, you know, if you apply enough, you'll get into a group. But a lot of the times you're going to be, especially if you're not a tank or a healer, you're going to be just jumping around in a capital city or something, trying to find the group and getting invited. But the majority of the problem comes when you actually get geared enough from the mythic zeros and you get, you know, 180 something item level. Then the only way to get better gear is to do keys, which are higher difficulty than the other ones. So you can see here like +2, +3, +4, and the higher the number, the more difficult it is, the harder the bosses hit or the mobs hit. But they also have special affixes as you go higher and higher, which make dungeon a bit more difficult. And it changes on a weekly basis. So sometimes like the bosses hit harder and have more HP. Sometimes like every time you kill a mob, your HP goes down. You get a debuff and a stacked debuff, which takes your HP down, and other affixes, which I don't want to get into. Now the problem is that when it comes to mythic pluses, when you try to apply for groups, you rarely get invited because they look at something called Raider IO, which is basically a score that lets people know how much mythic plus you have done. So if you're new and you don't have a mythic Raider.io, then you're pretty much it's very hard to get into groups. You can start by like spamming +2s, +3s, but it's a very long process, and frankly speaking, it's quite boring, and it's just a very lengthy process, and it's not easy to do, especially as a DPS. So that's one approach you can take. The other approach is actually doing raids. And Shadowlands has just one raid up to now, and you can apply at the it does have something like the duty finder in Final Fantasy where you can queue up for the raid, and it's just a much easier version, and the gear that drops is pretty it's lower eye level than if you do it normally with a group of people that you manually form. So it's not really a good way of getting gear. But that leaves us with actually forming groups to go into a raid. Now raids in World of Warcraft are pretty involved. So this is the raid that's for Shadowlands, Castle Nathria, and it has 10 different bosses. And there are a lot of trash mobs in between bosses as well. So if you want to, usually when guilds or groups want to do it together, they allocate 2 or 3 hours a night to actually go in there and try to clear it. So it needs a pretty good amount of time commitment. So if you are able to get into a guild, then you need to commit 2 or 3 hours in your afternoon once or twice a week to actually go in there and clear the bosses to get some good gear. So as you can see, this is if you do it on normal, you get 200 eye level, and then there are higher difficulties like heroic, which drop 213, and then there's mythic, which drops the highest, which is 226, and then there's 233 from the last boss. So this is the way you can get the highest eye level of gear. So it needs major time commitment, and again, the pieces of gear that drop from raids are random. So that's basically how it works, gearing in World of Warcraft through dungeons and raids. Now let's go look at Final Fantasy XIV and how they approach some of these problems. So I just hit level 80, which is the level cap for Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers, the latest expansion, a few days ago. And I think the highest eye level you can get in Final Fantasy XIV is 540, and I'm already 473 after a few days. And the gearing in Final Fantasy XIV works in a very interesting way. And I want to showcase to you guys how they have been listening to the feedback of the World of Warcraft community and implementing it in their games. So first and foremost, you have, from every piece of content that you do, from dungeons and the raids, you get currency. One is the Elegant Tombstone of Allegory, and the other one is the Elegant Tombstone of Revelation. And you can use these currencies to buy gear from vendors. So if you look at this screen here, I can spend the currency that I have on any piece that I need, and this is 490 eye level gear, which is pretty close to 540. This is the Allegory currency, and I can also use the higher level currency to buy better gear, which are 520, which is very close to the 540 eye level max, which we were talking about. So you can pretty much grind the dungeons and raids and buy specific gear that you want. Obviously, dungeons and raids also drop pieces of gear which you can use, but you can also target specific gear that you need, and it's not random. And this was just so nice. So good that they respect players' time, and that you can grind for a specific piece rather than playing Russian roulette every time you go into a dungeon. So that's one piece of it, and I want to show you guys like the beauty finder for the dungeons. So you have all these different things that you can queue up for. My level 80 dungeons are still locked, but you can queue up for level 50, 60, 70 dungeons, and once a day, and then you would get 120 of the Allegory tombstones and the Elegant Tombstones, which is used for lower eye level gear for lower levels. So it's really helpful for your alts. And every piece of content gives you these currencies, which helps people queue up for the different things in the game. So you get to experience all the different dungeons, and you're just not doing the endgame dungeons for Shadowbringers, which is awesome, I think. And you have trials, which are just a different piece of content that are not really present in World of Warcraft, but I just want to give you an idea. You have the raids that you can do, etc. So that's one piece. So you can do all these pieces of content to get these currencies, and then you spend it on whatever piece of gear that you want, and I found that extremely good. Now, another really cool thing is that with the raids in Shadowbringers, every raid is just the boss. There's no trash mobs. So you queue up, and it's just you fight a boss, and the boss fights are really awesome, which is not the point of this video, but they're really fun to do, and it's quite challenging, especially the first time you do it. And these ones also give currency, but what they also give is these tokens, which you then swap at the vendor for pieces of gear, which is another cool thing. It's kind of like what WoW used to do with tier gear. So you can come here and you can for example, swap 2 tokens for the actual Gauntlets of Fending, for example. And again, it's really good because you can target pieces of gear, and you can equip them, and it's pretty nice. The only thing I've noticed with Final Fantasy is you don't have many choices on the pieces of gear. So for example, I can only get one boot with some stats on it. It doesn't seem like you have that much power to play around with stats on the gear. So like, you know, in World of Warcraft, you can have like 4 different boots. One gives like crit and haste. The other one gives, for example, mastery and versatility. I'm not sure. I haven't seen that really in Final Fantasy 14, but maybe some of you vets that are looking at this video can give some tips on that. But that's been my experience in gearing Final Fantasy 14. It's been extremely good. I'm surprised on how much value they put on player time. And what's even more surprising to me, and the point that where I'm saying it's left me speechless, is because how much they're listening to feedback from the World of Warcraft community and implementing it in their games, while Blizzard is just ignoring all of that. And the Final Fantasy game, has become so much better because of it. I mean, the gearing process has been so good and smooth for me. And I've had to grind, like I had to grind dungeons to get these tombstones, but it feels good because you can target specific pieces of gear and you don't feel like your time's been wasted. Yeah, so with that being said, I do want to end this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.